Welcome to this very odd session of D&D where I am running for 40 people, but also myself. Usually, I feed off of the energy of all of my players, but I have to fill all this space by myself. I don't know how to start this, but I'm going to try to get into it. After a long series of events spanning the entire country of Philea, extending even into the Underdark, a series of parties following leaders and friends toward the meeting of the monarch find, them, find themselves in the city of Equilem, at the edge of the Quarian wetlands, where we see vast and lush rainforest meeting the eastern edge of the Invarden Range. You see beautiful horizons of mountains. You see beautiful horizons of mountains. The city itself is built onto this mountain, similar in somewhat uh, uh, aesthetic to the city of Arcrine for those who have been. Like many orcish cities, there are very rounded buildings, lots of people hanging around on the street, a lot of places where water is publicly kind of available in these large fountains that people give to each other. The city does have aqueducts coming from the top. In the distance, there is a very intentionally ruined statue of the Titan in a small fort nearby at the edge of the mountain. As we pick up in this city, in this grand garden in front of a temple of life, we see, firstly, all of our characters from across the 8 campaigns here in this one spot. I'm assuming you know who you are. I'm not going to list all of you. But we also see almost all of the important figures in Philea gathered here. The garden has kind of very simple lattice kind of fence around the edges, beautiful flowers, lots of space for people. But the meeting is perhaps a bit tight around this garden. It's a very large space, but there are many people. You see, most notably, before I get into the proper introductions, looming above the city, a dragon which makes all of you feel like ants. Not just ancient, more than gargantuan. This dragon who was born shortly after the dawn of time, and when the god of forgiveness ascended, gave this dragon the position of progenitor, which has meaning not just amongst dragons, but to the world. Progenitor of the gold dragons. With a head that is 200 feet from top to bottom, Rodavir looms over the city, here to participate. Amongst the many delegations, I suppose I should say, there is a dwarven woman, the amethyst skin, kind of dark brown hair, short kind of beard, braided hair, in a very Poetic order looking get up. The layers of grays, very, very exciting for them. Um, you see that she will introduce herself as Faline, and she is the orator or the delegator for this meeting. You see that this woman is at a podium at the center of these gardens, not guardians. And you see that most of the more important figures are near the front of this sort of inner circle. There are many people who are here to witness who maybe do not have a voice or a right to speak, perhaps, but are important to witness or hear these events. You see that this garden is also relatively close to the mountainside to give space for the very large dragon to kind of loom slightly out of the way. Um, this dragon, to give you some sense of scale, outside of its head, if stood beside these statues of the Titan built by the Sovietic Empire, some of the largest things in Philia generally, they would look small. The statues would look small. This is a being of incomprehensible size and age and knowledge. Most notably about Rodavir, which I often forget to mention, is the fact that I believe it is on the left side of his body, or his face and neck, are scars, large scars. And there's this confusing and terrifying idea that there are things big enough in the world to challenge beings of this immense scale. For the Bonkicule specifically, I want everyone to just think of that bit early on in the campaign where everyone was talking about sizes. I'm so sorry for everyone else who doesn't understand that. Um, you see that so as everyone's collected, you see that this woman walks up. You see that she has this podium that has sort of papers on it that seem to be enchanted of some right. As she kind of waves her hand, you can see for anyone who would happen to have a view, like little obsession writing being written on these papers, and it looks dense. It looks very dense for the writing. It takes a certain kind of brain and person to write and read obsession. If you were to imagine graph paper being your basis of writing, of like your structure of writing, and each letter perfectly touched like at least two sides of the graph squares, that is obsession. It's just nightmare. Very rigid. It looks like a maze. It looks like someone is drawing a maze, but it's words. um as she waves her hand and begins to write whatever uh um beginnings of this meeting, you see she says, or will begin to speak rather, to everyone. At the first meeting of the monarch, after the collapse of the Sovietic Empire, we would like to extend our thanks to the people of Kortal for hosting us in these dire times. We would like to acknowledge those present at the meeting, the Archmatron of Nebrel. You all see acknowledged here a silver-skinned orcish woman with just vibrant blue eyes that look similar to, this kind of color, this general kind of blue. Very, very old in kind of druidic uh, um um style garb, a kind of large head, kind of mantelpiece, two hands on a staff. This woman, orcs only live 50 years. This woman looks ancient. Something about the way she carries herself. It's like you're not 50. You are 1,000. Um, for those who might know as well, you know, so many people listening. Some of you might know that that is because being an archdruid and an Aasimar, her life is extremely extended beyond the regular orcish life expectancies. And she is quite old. Um, Elevar Rorik, the Royal of Cortal, and you see a on the opposite end of the spectrum, a very, very young, like orcish teenager, like a young woman, somewhere in her like mid-teens, maybe 15. Um, the deep purple skin, tusks, honestly, probably still growing in. Kind of thick black hair, kind of very well postured, and you see she has these eyes that are like almost very piercing. Like there's a piercing intellect behind this little child's mind. For those of you who are familiar with the orcish traditions, and I imagine in this large, large crowd, there's like a little bit of like, who's that? What's going on? And everyone gets this information to some extent. Um, the system that the orcs have for the royal succession is that when each person in the line comes of age, they take the spot and are guided or perhaps counseled by those who have assumed the position before. So Elevar is somewhat new to the position, but looks like a person who has been raised for something like this, and is a child, but a formidable child. Um, the High Sabisuary of Vu, and you see a very, very old looking elf. I believe he is a high elf. I could have described him as something else earlier. Um, yes. A yes. A high elf. In the stage of elven aging, in which he has entered the like extreme androgyny and beginning to like really prune up, like the late stages of elven age. Has like this very heavy kind of gown on, and very, very fine, material as well. Looks much more perhaps expensive, in contrast to his orcish counterpart, the High Sabisuary being the head of the churches and faith of absurdity. Um, Suelar Maluk, the royal of Menevia, and you see a middle-aged elf, um, uh, faces as beginning to show that kind of maturity. Wood elf, so the deep red skin and the golden blush, kind of small antlers, and light brown hair that goes back. Very well postured, and in a similar sense to Rorik, or Elevar Rorik, despite their significant age difference, um, holds a very similar posture to her, and is similarly like having these sort of piercing eyes. You see that, um, or rather, for those who would know, um, Suelar Maluk was the first elven royal appointed by the Svettic Empire, chosen by the Svettic Empire. And the rumors that would have spread in the last months were not of his corruption, but how long he held the elven province together as everyone was being tempted towards war. The elven army that came up from the kingdom of Ladren, the elven army that went south from the kingdom of Rodan, the kingdom of Kenetrin, all for weeks and weeks bowed to his commands to not mobilize despite their needs. The Nithium truce mark, which was not defended until recently, could have been taken a long time ago if not for this figure. This is someone who learned what the Svettic Empire wanted and learned how to play the game for the betterment of his people. He's very well respected. You see the Archimandrite of Rosar, and you see a small halfling, kind of longish black hair, very kind of bright eyes, someone who almost looks a bit troubled. He looks a bit nervous or guilty, but has also this like air of confidence about him. You see that somewhat simple in its design, but very brightly colored kind of robes with the colors of hope. So like yellows and golds and oranges, kind of bright colors of the dawn. And kind of new, almost like bracer-like things around the forearms, which take on kind of darker colors that some might recognize as the Servants Under Twilight. The rumor about this figure is that he was very corrupted, and then a keeper of balance named Ian, that's a player, and some other people confronted him and did not remove him from his position, but made him better suited for it, restored his faith, brought him to the side of the faithful. You see Wardon Lafi, the Royal of Falano, is also announced. Kind of a skinny, in his like 40s for a halfling, or his halfling 40s, so his human like late 20s. But like looks like a person who does not sleep well, kind of messy curly brown hair, like light brown hair. Does not look the part of a royal, does not really compare with our friends Elevar and Sewellar. You see she next announces the Weddick Absolute of Kal Krashar, and you see a old dwarf, big white beard, kind of like heavy robes that have elements of like metal in them, still grays, but very ornate. They look like the robes of the Order Pope, the Weddick Absolute, and just this very kind of like stern, kind of cold faced, I think kind of lighter, almost like a rose quartz colored skin, and looks almost a little bit like a statue. You see next announced is Mimian Asalara, the Royal of Orodian, and you see a younger dwarven woman, amethyst skin, so darker, around the kind of like crease lines of her face that are beginning to grow in. There are kind of like little, almost like I don't know if they're called, but like almost like little like white lines that you see in sort of the folds or the flaws of like an amethyst. Dressed fairly well, seems confident, but does not possess a particularly piercing intellect in the way that Sewellar or Elevar might. Someone who is seems good enough for her position, but is I don't know how to describe it. Has an air of responsibility, but maybe not royalty. But in these times has played her part well enough, and is on the side of good. You see, Faline will continue. The recognized officials from Abral Hiro are not present. Is there a challenge to the royal in Abral Hiro? And you see, stepping up, a very, very dark-skinned man, looks mostly human, if not for a little bit of uh, half elf in the ears. Um, Very much the aesthetic of Idris Elba in Thor Ragnarok, for those of you who know it. So kind of like long-ish dreads, somewhere in his 70s to 80s for a half elf. So he's getting up there in his middle age, but these kind of piercing eyes, very, very formidable looking person in all blacks, and with little accents of gold. This is who some of you might recognize as a servant of the God King, and more specifically, a didectant, someone who kind of politically neutral, except for cases of responsibility towards the royal succession. You see, he steps up. I, Merodal, of the servants of the God King, recognize an honest and righteous challenge to the authority of the royal in Abral Hiro. This challenge is made by Alander Lilifet, and he points to a man with dark skin as well, human, clean shaven, bald, um, very kind of broad shoulders, big build, but these solemn but kind of eyes. He currently is wearing the armor of the safeguard, kind of heavy armor, the kind of whites and light blues, very, very like knightly figure, someone who perhaps does not look to fit the part in the way that, again, Elevar or Rorik or Sewellar does. But this Allender figure looks like he carries a heavy weight of responsibility, and perhaps there is a sense of you know, royalty or princeliness, or some kind of nobility in his heart, that he might carry, more so than someone like Mimien. Um, Miradol will continue to speak. Additionally, the servants of the God King have been betrayed and slain by Usimic knights outside of Brightwall, and it is the view of those represented, or those representing Abral Hiro, that the Seminary is corrupted and unfit for service. You see, Faline will kind of nod and say, do all parties recognize the challenge and therefore the validity of authority to Allender Lilifet? And you see that all of those present, the four royals and the four religious figures, will express their agreement in a yay or a yes. You see, Faline will continue once more. Present, we also have the nameless red archfey of the Red Court, Rodavir, child of Omun, and the current progenitor of gold dragons, Sina Ta'abna of the Merceran Gift, representing their military force, as well as Zaret and Amiznit of the Tieflings of the Corian Wetlands. Do all figures acknowledge the authority of that these figures represent? And once more, this time with Allender required to respond, everyone will agree. So Rodavir, again, big dragon, you've seen him. I've described him. Rather, the nameless red archfey who is present amongst this meeting with another figure who we'll introduce later, is very red. Their body is humanoid. There is this kind of like robe or cape that flows as if there's ever a kind of like a wind. And their body is made up of deep red leaves and ribbons, or the outside of it. And the ribbons across the body, kind of woven into the leaves, are constantly pulling. And there's kind of a lot of ribbons on the face, constantly pulling. Um, but the form never changes. It's not moving around. It's this like almost strange like effect that you might get on a computer screen of something going but not actually moving. And it's just like it's not constant, but it's just like pull and stop and then pull and stop and pull and stop. The eyes themselves seem to be empty but carry some kind of presence or feeling that is almost again incomprehensible in some senses. The nameless red archfey, a very odd figure. um Sina Ta'abna is a Gith with silver skin, in the same color as one of the four moons. I think it's the third smallest, um, um, third largest. It's the third moon, um, with kind of black dots in kind of symmetrical patterns across her skin. Unclear if it is um, part of her skin or like tattoos or something. But there are other Gith with her, but she's the one who is recognized to speak in these proceedings. You see, Fallon will continue once more after the consensus. Are there any additional voices to be authorized before this session begins? All of your bodies begin to shake as Rodavir speaks. His mouth opens, and this resonant sound that shakes the very mountain comes out. Speaks, the words are almost, I would say, interpreted slowly. He's not mouthing them, but the words come out understood. Agridol has fought this corruption with the Gargori. There's a long pause. Um, uh, Not because he wants to hold the tension, but because if he spoke too long, everyone might fall apart. And Gorgodon has watched events closely for many years. Another long pause. I extend my authority to their wisdom. Um, Gorgodon is an ancient gold dragon. Um, uh, a strangely, um, how would I describe this? Almost like jovial or like almost trickster, like smile on this dragon's face. Just a little happy little schemer. Um, but very old. Has those kind of like wizened dragon age lines. Um, uh, Agridol is a adult dragon. Um, um, Both of these dragons are kind of towards the edge, behind most of the crowd. Their voices will carry very easily and they can hear very well. So they do not choose not to interrupt. Um, um, Gorgodon wraps around a large part of the garden and is a by all intents and purposes, a gargantuan size category of creature. Rodavir could fit Gorgodon in his mouth. Usually I would wait for a response from the players, but considering I am orating this to myself, I will assume everyone has a moment there. Rodavir can fit the gargantuan gold dragon Gorgodon in his mouth, can bite him whole and swallow him whole. That is the difference in size, because Gorgodon can do that to all of you with some room. He could do that to a horse. A Sesher, sorry. None of you know what a horse is. Next page. You see Faline will regard the group and say, are there any objections? No one will speak. The Archmatron will step forward. Again, a silvery skin, blue eyes, very, very heavily aged orcish woman, with this kind of peaceful, happy smile, and a kind of quiet wisdom that some old people possess. Like, they know the secrets and they're going to watch you figure them out, and not in a way that's cruel, but in a way that's reverent. You see, she says, Emil, who has come to be known as the Bright Flame, a keeper of balance amongst the forces of Nebrel, has guided the affirmation of faith in the wetlands. Much of the safety we find here rests on his shoulders. And he has risen the ranks of these keepers as a virtuous warrior and sage. I would extend my authority to his wisdom. Faline will once check for objections. There will be no objections. Suelar, the prince of the Elven province, will step forward. Lord Donmire is a wise and respected lord whose wisdom has seen many ages, only outreached by the matron Rodavir and the Archfey. I would extend my authority and wisdom to him. Jesse said that wrong. I would extend my authority to him. Some people you notice will describe or attribute the authority to someone's wisdom. It is not Lord Donmire's wisdom necessarily, but is also his great experience in these lands. To back up a little bit, Emil the Bright Flame, very classically orcish figure in his build, very large, the deep purple skin, the brilliant purple skin, white tattoos all up his arm, up to his neck and his face, is wearing his full, like, kind of keeper's balance armor that some of you might have seen him a little bit more casually out of. His hair, I imagine, has been cut recently, so he's back to undercut, and the hair is kind of slicked back and tied into a bun, but dark black hair. And just this, like, it's the energy of a golden retriever if the golden retriever was also like a wise sage. It's like, I'm happy to be here. I'm a happy guy. I've seen some shit also. And just has this like infectious kind of like just brightness to the character. Lord Donmire, in contrast, a very, very old elf in his late 800s, I believe. He lost my train of thought. A high elf, so the kind of pinkish skin, slowly kind of graying hair, these piercing eyes, and the elements of that androgynous, like, aged elf facial structure, but also kind of there's something in a more like a real world sense that you could attribute to him about a masculine sense of his presence. Fine robes, a beautiful kind of rapier at his hip. For those of you who do not know Lord Donmire's reputation already, he, being in his late 800s, lived through the Soviet Empire. He was a lord then, he remains a lord now, the only one who remains a lord. He fought against the Soviet Empire. He got a reputation. Frankly, they were probably a little scared of what would happen if they did something to him. He holds a large amount of authority amongst the Elven province. People like Loria, Arakini, other elves who like maybe haven't met him yet or gotten close enough would recognize, if not the person, the name. Once again, space is cleared for objections. No one objects. You see that beside the nameless red archfey, there is a pale-skinned, feminine figure, very tall. I should also mention the nameless red archfey is in the 10 to 15 foot range. This figure is a little shorter. Both of them kind of float with this ethereal kind of energy, flowing kind of gown on this woman, and kind of white skin with little cracks of red. But this very serious face, like this is a very serious situation. Um, you see, she will speak. Some of you might recognize this figure as an archfey, the Lady of the White Well. The method by which my lord communicates is difficult for mortal minds to receive. For the purposes of ease of this conversation, his wish is that I speak with his intent and share his authority. I also share some of the blame of the situation lying in my wake. You see that Faline will create space for objections. No one objects. But there are some intrigued faces. You see Sina to Abna, arms kind of crossed, with her like heavy kind of beautiful armor, beginning to eye up this figure. You see that what was his name? Wardon. Yeah, Worden Laffy, the halfling prince, has this kind of weird of like, who the fuck is this person? Or this being. But most of the other royals do not share this kind of disposition. Those who are placed in positions of authority seem to have some degree of patience or understanding. You see, Allender will step forward. Many battles have been fought under my leadership, and I have endured many mistakes and failures. I have learned to lean on those around me. My wisdom extends to the voices of Luana, the wartime leader of the Cloud Tower, and Garand, a representative of the Arcanites of the Arcane Order in the Cloud Tower. Additionally, Zvedit has been a representative for the tieflings of Valina to my people. I would extend my authority to the former and ask that the latter, Zvedit's authority, is regarded with the or recognized with the other tieflings. He says that perfectly. Jesse made the mistakes. Once again, Feline will regard the group, ask for if there are objections. There are none. You see, it is beginning to. It looks like Feline is about to continue on, and you see Agradal, the adult dragon, who I should also describe as with a Gargori, so a dragon rider, a kind of feminine dragonborn figure in kind of heavy armor. Some of you have seen figures like this before, a good portion of you. But you see Agradal will look towards the Bunkicule at a, sorry, and I'll do this and I'll get back to it. At a um, tiefling with deep green skin, orange crystalline horns, as they tend to do. Kind of maybe thin sort of cheeks, but somewhat of a strong kind of angular jaw, a very kind of like strong eyebrows as well. Um, a very kind of worried or curious looking figure, kind of in the back of the crowd a little bit. But you see Agradal will look towards this figure and say, Abuzat spoke with keen insight and wisdom on the cult to the late Gaigarat. I would suggest that his authority is recognized as well, as a perhaps expert or informant. Jesse's having hard with words. This is a long scene. Um, you see Abby is kind of stunned. He's frankly dressed like a regular guy. Um, he was not expecting to have a voice at the meeting of the monarch. You see that Feline will ask if there are any objections, and there are none. And you see that I imagine the Bunky Kuel might push him forward as he comes to the forefront. To go back a little bit, I've realized I may have missed a few characters' descriptions. Luana is a cleric of the Legion. So white and gold kind of robes, very, very broad, half orc woman, kind of light purple skin, dark black hair that's kind of tied tightly in like a complicated braid that just probably never moves. It looks herself like someone who um, uh, cannot be pushed over. Very, very like serious looking frame and posture. Um, um, but the ever so, for those who might know her better, the slightest bit of softness in the eyes. Someone who does care, um, but has a very serious job. Garand is a somewhat regular looking human, anomalous in only that most humans in Folia tend to have a bit darker skin. His skin's a bit lighter, um, um, like white, kind of brown hair. Beards are very common in the human province as well. So very nice manicured beard. Um, Late 20s, has definitely like seen the sides of wars. His maybe looks even a bit tired perhaps of all the travel. But kind of short hair, kind of put back, very very thin hair, um but looks uh to some degree put together, kind of grays and blues of the arcane order. um the other two tieflings mentioned earlier of the Quarian wetlands, Zaret and Amiznit. Some of you might recognize Zaret as the person who is responsible for that spicy root being passed around from Wilwyn to Emil. She is a green-skinned tiefling, as they all are, orange crystalline horns, kind of black sclera and yellow irises, a couple of like white tattoos, in a similar like inking style, perhaps of the Korean wetlands, but aesthetically or visually, in the art style, very perhaps infernal or a culture that stemmed from the infernal. Um, uh, the nicest regular clothes that she could find, and a Miznit, a bit more kind of looks like a leader. They don't appear to know each other. Same black sclera, yellow eyes, black kind of long hair tied back, orange crystalline horns, um, well postured, a bit more of a sort of serious face. Um, so both of them are from different parts of the wetlands, and up until recently, we're not aware of each other and their people. Zvedit from Volina is I'd imagine a bit short actually. Same color skin, kind of almost like a rounded face a little bit. Um, kind of um, tired looking individual, but a kind of kind tiredness in the way that he's can't be more than 50 at most, but carries a kind of like that kind of tired kindness that some old people do of like, of course dear, like kind of thing. But looks kind of very not concerned, but um on guard perhaps. um, um, he will go join with the other tieflings and Abizat as well. And Abizat will find himself very uncomfortable being in the forefront. Um, you see that Feline, after a moment of kind of silence, will say, "Are there any other voices to be recognized?" And then silence. Then we shall proceed. Who wishes to speak first? Um, you see the Lady of the White Well. Well, if I may, it was a knight charged under my oath who has brought the events to Philea and beyond. A long time ago in the reign of the Svedek Empire, this knight, called the Moonfire Knight, their reputation known by many Phileans as a rebel against the empire here, grew pained and tired with the experiences, troubled perhaps. He went searching into the Feywild for answers, first to me and then beyond. He found himself in Sterno and found the seed of unrest. Without consulting me, he took the seed of unrest to the heart of Svedna and planted it. It was this first seed that spread across the lines of faith, of worship of the Titan, and brought this empire low. And we are still dealing with these consequences. My responsibility to the mortal realm is to amend this mistake. This responsibility cannot be understated. It is with this that I pledge my powers to the people of this land and demand retribution be taken upon me, and will kind of move forward, not even step, but sort of float forward and not bow her head to the point where her head can be cut off. She's too tall. Just kind of bow her head as to receive whatever these people have for her. You see Allender will step forward, kind of strange look on his face, a little confused. Um, Lady, even by the strictest laws of justice, you are guilty of no crime. Failure to stop your agent or lack of awareness of their actions cannot result in retribution on you. And you see that the Uedic Absolute will also nod and say, by the laws of order, you're also free of guilt. A pacted individual can only incur guilt upon themselves. Um, the ground begins to shake again as Radavir speaks. I would seek forgiveness for this action or lack thereof. Long pause. I believe this would be a righteous decision. After the kind of immense silence of every time Radavir talks, you see that Feline will kind of take that very seriously as forgiveness is a whole thing. like a religion here. Um, but perhaps the symbolism of such, and with that, the act of putting faith towards those that you would consider an ally, also symbolic here. I will say, any objections to the proposal then of forgiveness for the Lady of the White Well? And you see that no one will respond, but those who are perceptive, Sineta Abna will again kind of shift, like, feels weird. Um, Lady of the White Whale will nod, and say, I am humbled by the graciousness you have all shown, and will kind of back up. You see that the Archimandrate of Hope, again, in the bright kind of golden colors of the dawn, black hair, kind of, again, a bit of a nervous energy. My lady, is there any insight to be gained from how this seed of unrest was planted? Anything we can learn to stop it? See, Sina to Abna will speak up very quickly. I can speak with authority on this. There is no insight to be gained about banishing the seed in the planting. All seeds must be found, or rather, all seers must be found and killed. This is the singular way. I believe everyone knows that, or has some context, but in case you don't, Seed of Unrest is the divine emissary of the god of lies, expresses itself as corruption, the crystalline hatred, crystalline seers. The crystalline seers themselves are like the seeds. They grow from the corruption and birth the crystalline hatreds and the fairies and the changed ones and all that stuff. So they have to be, each seer has to be found and killed wherever they are. You see Emil will step forward. If it eases you, Archimandrate, the corruption can be slowed and even stagnated by the reaffirmation of faith. There is much you could do in your position of authority for your people. And again, very bright energy to him. One that is perhaps difficult to communicate when you are reading around 18 pages of written dialogue. You see the Archimandrate will nod, and a sense of peace and understanding comes about him. Right now, in the Halfling province, everything west of a city called Lilliville, which is about halfway between the Invarden Range, the eastern edge, and the coastline of Philea in the west, has fallen to corruption and crystalline seers. And the Archimandrate unknowingly played a part in that. The Lady of the White will speak once more. Given the scale of this problem, then, the nameless red archfey finds it pressing that they are allowed by the leaders of this land to protect it, the people of Philea. Should be put under their domain. This would mean direct influence would be given to the Archfey over the course of these events. You see the High Sabiciary will speak up. Again, High Elf, old as fuck, old as balls, dude. Like perhaps should have been mentioned. That was an oversight by me in who outranks the Lord Donmeyer in age here. But we'll speak. The Nameless Red Court defends Vu from an emissary as we speak, and is pacted with Willinair to abandon the ways of the Fae in the search for mortal understanding. Again, a couple of whispers will go about the crowd to explain exactly what that means, because that sounds like a nice idea, but it carries a lot more meaning. one of the ideas kind of present in the religion of absurdity, these like high level idea, is that any being given the right line of logic can turn from whatever it was supposed to do, whether it be a devil supposed to be evil, or a celestial supposed to be good, whatever they were called to, will instead learn how to perceive things like a mortal, learn empathy and understanding. So the nameless red archfey has sacrificed the very nature of fey, um, uh, to protect the people of the land. Something even less known is why. I will communicate that here, although it will not be spoken aloud amongst the meeting. But the nameless red knew the demigods in Philea before they died. We considered them friends. And Philea was taken, conquered. And in that loss, there was the absence of feeling grief, and the strange confusion took the then just regular archfey had a name, which is what has brought us to this point. You see, Allender says, they have already put their blessing on the Cloud Tower and have helped in protecting it. And Agradol, again, the adult dragon, um, uh, they personally intervened at the Nithium Drusmark. They have shown themselves to be trustworthy. You see that the matron step forward, the archmatron rather. You see, kind of as this energy kind of almost like nods before she speaks. She's like almost like winding up to speak. I have known this face since before it was nameless. I would urge the acceptance of their domain, and with it, that the leaves finally embrace the change they have been waiting for. And look, step back. Again, kind of whispers, but everyone seems to agree. The reputation of this archfey has been widespread. Many of you have personally seen how they helped. Feline will say, are there any objections then to the proposal to accept the domain of the nameless red archfey? And you see before anyone agrees, the Lady of the White Well will say, the archfey will vow to serve the people of this land and would offer a contract in the way that us Fae tend to do. The Uetic Absolute will step forward and say, I may review this contract if the monarch finds it fitting. And you see Elevar, I believe, speaking for the first time in this meeting. I would put my faith in you and your wisdom, and would move to defer to your knowledge, absolute, in this matter. For context, in case anyone does not know, the religion of the order and the Uetic Absolute are super about contracts. They love their paperwork. So this is like the Pope of order and paperwork. This is within his house, his wheelhouse. You see Feline, again, the kind of order scribe here, will clear any objections. There are none. The nameless red will produce a contract on paper, and will hand it, kind of float over and hand it to the Uetic Absolute. The Uetic Absolute will, eyes glow, hair moves. The most intense reading of a contract anyone has ever seen, as the kind of pages flip before him, and he gains this divine understanding. before saying, I find that this contract is acceptable, in good faith, and a benefit to the people of Philia. Um, I would present it to the rest of the monarch to be signed. And all those present who have authority here are invited to sign it, with the exception of Sina Ta'abna as a guest, rather than a member of Philia. She is an outsider. Um, um, but she's kind of like, you can tell she's like, the fuck is going on? Like this is not the a familiar vibe to how things are going in Svedenham, where she leads forces, and it is not how they run things on Mercera, the moon that she is from. Um, you see, Gorgodon will speak next. Um, my people find themselves without proper representation. Radavir would like to claim Fulia under his protection as well, to be treated as a home, with the promise that we also gain a royal representation in the monarch. Um, you see that no one will speak after, and Feline will say, does the monarch accept Radavir's protection under these conditions? And you see Radavir will speak. Gorgodon has long worked to bring our people closer. Long pause, powerful voice. Um, Many of his descendants find themselves here today. Mashrak, that's you. And also, maybe Loria. I would name him the Hominid and give him above all else in the way that an archimandrate or seminary has influence over the succession of this dragonborn line of royals. Everyone waits a real long time to make sure he's done talking, just in case, before Falion says, does the monarch find this to be an acceptable proposal as well? Once again, agreed. Then how shall we proceed? You see, very quickly and confidently, but also with a air of hesitancy or perhaps even guilt in speaking. Elevar Rorik, the young, kind of short, because she's a child, royal of the Orcish province of Kortal, come forward. Great lords, we face an enemy on many fronts. And even with these great beings on our side, rather, our power is limited. You see at this point, for those, again, who are more perceptive, Garand, who is the Arcanite present, again, pale skin, brown, well-manicured beard, kind of short hair, who's very much paying attention, get just kind of eyes kind of dart like onto the ground, as if he goes into thought or is thinking. He's receiving a sending spell, and you watch his expression kind of really darken. And he will put a hand on Emil, or rather on Allender's shoulder, and speak something as Elevar continues. We face the difficulty of sacrifice. Not all battles can be won. I believe it would be most wise to choose which ones we lose. There is a stunning silence. You see Lord Donmire steps forward. You speak with a sharp insight. It is with many lifetimes worth of dread that I believe Elevar speaks the truth. I have learned this lesson many times over under the reign of the Sovietic Empire. And there is like a really fucked up kind of silence that follows of like you can see Allender also, especially given whatever he just heard, is like sacrifice, like in a kind of way that those who know Allender, like Allender is all about like sacrificing for the cause, but it's something that he like he has brought forth with his people, and everyone's kind of agreed, like everyone in the human province at the Cloud Tower had agreed, like, yeah, we're gonna die for this cause so that everyone else can live. And everyone is at this monarch at this meeting are kind of taking this weird perspective of like, I would not ask any of you to like, don't sacrifice for me. No, 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 no. Um, um, you see, Rodavir will speak. I feel the weight of your words. Your heart carries their burden. Long pause. And in my many centuries, I have come to understand this as well. And looking at this big dragon with scars on the side of his head and neck, um, you cannot imagine what he has experienced that would teach him this lesson as well. But it surely would have to be something that would have shattered the foundations of Falia, as his voice threatens to do. You see, Allender will speak up. The once bound emissary at the Cloud Tower has been set free. The humans have sacrificed much, and we are willing to continue sacrificing in the name of these ideals. This is not something I would ask of anyone else. You see, very quickly, Suwelar will step forward and say, respectfully, I will not have it. The elves who survive this devastation will live to see a new age. The humans and orcs will not. I will not have you sacrifice anymore when I still have 5 human lifetimes and 10 orcish ones ahead of me. The elves, if there is to be a sacrificial allocation of resources, will endure this with grace. Again, silence as like everyone hears these words. Suelar is a person who has played a difficult game for 500 years. A difficult game. But he's also been alive for a little over 500 years. And I think he knows what this means more than anyone else. He saw the dwarves and the halflings and the humans change from Phrygia to Falino, Rodian, and Abral Hero. He has seen this country turn inside out and break open. Elevar will step forward once more. Your kindness rings in my heart, but I know I would not ask this of you either. One day soon for you, there will be no orcs who will. There will be orcs who will not know, but your people will not forget. You see Suelar in this kind of strange warmth to the concern. Says, we will share our stories and lessons with the orcs as we have since the truce mark was first founded. I offer this sacrifice in full understanding. You see Allender says, it is with great difficulty that I even consider acceptance. Your words move me. Many of us are ready to die. But I would not lie. We do wish to live. Your gesture will not be forgotten. Um, you see, as Allender is speaking, Agridol, for those of you who are more perceptive, the adult dragon with the dragon rider, um, has a shift of disposition and then will speak. Another emissary has been brought forth in the west of Kortal at the sacrifice of another long-lived dragon. The Gargori are retreating to safety. You see Mimian for the first time will kind of speak up, the dwarven royal. How many emissaries are free now? And you see the Lady of the White Well very calmly say, this makes the fourth. One in the Elven province, one amongst the halflings, one at the Cloud Tower, and one in the north. You see Allender will speak up. One has been defeated, killed rather. Two remain. One can be found in a place I believe is called the City of Light. And the final one remains a mystery. How are we to deal with these emissaries? And we'll kind of look out to like the wise people here. You see Emil will step forward again. Again, this strange fucking happiness and brightness to him in this sad time. This very like, again, virtuous seems very an apt description of him. If each correlates to a faith, then the final emissary will come either through the avenues of life or forgiveness, depending on which emissary just came through in the west of Corton. Though I do not know how we would find this. You see Sina to Abna again with this very striking authority. Even if we could find, or could rather, even we could not find this emissary before it is summoned or selected to be summoned. And you see there is a kind of whispers amongst everyone before Abizat, the again, just regular looking tiefling dude. Honestly, to be fair, a lot of tieflings look somewhat regular compared to the like very fine clothing of the rest of the meeting here. But you see, he says, I think I know how. And everyone will kind of go mostly silent and look at him. And as everyone looks at him, he's like, fuck. The cult uses these symbols to spread their mantra. It's how they summon the emissary, right? And Allender will say there is a second part to the mantra, but yes, in essence. And you see Abizat will say, all of these corruptions need a specific avenue through faith to bring forth with the help of some kind of catalyst, a death of a dragon, or the soul of a dragon, a large battle of some kind. But who decides what that avenue is? I've spoken with ex-cultists. I've spoken with the people who've decoded most of these symbols, the Scarlet Sleuths. And we've learned that the corruption can be corrupted. So what if we created our own, spread it around the cult, made and controlled our own avenue for the emissary? There's nothing stopping us from doing that. You see Sina to Abna, who's perhaps gotten intrigued, not quite positive yet, but is like, oh, didn't think of that kind of vibe. Will speak up and say, from that point, all you would need to kill the emissary is its true name. If you can discern which one is which. You see that the Wuetic Absolute, again, the very old dwarf, the order pope, so to speak, um, it is my understanding that Sora is dead and Zehenia is at the Cloud Tower. The rest of the names of these beings can be found written on the Pillars of Order. This would be easy, but finding how they express and in which form is difficult. There was Speak, as someone who is amongst us today, a Wuetic judge by the name of Marlien, who suggested that if you could find items belonging to people who served the emissaries, there is a process through which you could find the names of the emissaries, the ones who bestowed power into those items. Um, and you see Allender kind of, for the first time, almost like look in awe, and can see the kind of wheels, the like leader and the general turning in his head. Um, then this could change everything. Uh, this is a path to securing our victory. And you see everyone will kind of like give a brief kind of nod towards Allender and then Abizad, and Abizad's like, what did I just do? Not out loud, but for the Bunky Cool who are watching this, looks over like, I don't know what I'm doing. Sina will once again speak up. Um, we will aid you in this. You are a formidable people, and there are lessons to be learned from your approach. But with aid, there is a demand of return of service. That this war is continued beyond your borders to Sevedinum, 1 year beyond the events concluding here. And you see Allender will say, if my people are to be spared the devastation, then we will commit to this war. You see Elevar without hesitation. Mine as well. Mimian, again, the Dwarvish royal, will say, we can send well-funded mercenaries to Sevedinum on behalf of our people. You see that Sina will say, I find these offerings acceptable then. And Feline will, kind of taking the cue there, speak up and say, so, forces from Obral Hero, Cortal, and Orodien will be sent to aid Sevedinum upon the conclusion of these events, or rather 1 year beyond the conclusion of these events. Are there any objections? And there are none. You see that Werdon Lafi, the halfling prince, again, the kind of guy who really probably is going to be replaced very shortly after these events conclude, kind of says, how shall the forces be divided then? How do we approach? My people have suffered. They're suffering under um, these seers, these things. And you see, I should have done the. I just realized I'm doing the wrong accent for those two. You see, Sawala says, the emissary at the Cloud Tower must be dealt with first. And Luana, the half orc, the wartime leader of the Cloud Tower, will say, if the Abrellans are not to sacrifice, I agree. We could then move forces to aid the Didectans and Legion against the Roden, Usimic Knights, and Hellish forces engaged at Arvo. I may be able to summon an emissary of the general at these events. And you see that there's a lot of like, oh, like a very like, I didn't think we could do that. You see, she says, I have begun to receive visions. and my faith with certainty remains uncorrupted. Um, from there, with this emissary, Brightwell could be taken, and the human province cleansed once and for all of corruption, and claimed for the faithful. Beyond that, we can move into the remaining corrupted territories. You see, Cena will say, my forces will join in this campaign. And Lord Donmire will speak up and say, I will lend the strategy that I have learned over my years to these plans. And my soldiers still remain at the Cloud Tower. I should see them before any more lives are lost. You see, Rodavir will speak up. I can protect the North. Any power, or rather my power, outweighs these emissaries, but I do not possess the power to strike them down. You see, Agradal will say, again, the adult dragon, dragon rider, Gargori. The Gargori can follow and assist the elven armies up north in maintaining the effects of this new emissary. You see that the Archimandrate will speak up. As the prince said, my people, and I'm switching into the Quebecois accent halfway through it. As the prince said, my people have fallen to corruption. Is there something to be done on their behalf outside of my presence? And you see, Allender will say, once the seers breach, there's little that can be done. The Arcanites have been working their way across the available territories to remove seers where they can. But this is outside of the ability of these teams. And you see Abzat once more. You can redeem the cultists. Again, corrupt the corrupted. This weakens the seers. And you personally could instill faith in your people. We weakened a seer in Listel. It was still a hell of a hard fight, but we didn't have that many people to deal with it in the first place. I don't mean to overstep my boundary. But the cultists, many of them are just as much victims as the rest of us. And you see that the archmatron say, you overstep nothing. Your authority is recognized. I believe sending the keepers, led by Emil with the Archimandrate, could help the province of Falano and their faith. And you see Emil again, similarly well postured to kind of Luana, very, very proud, I would say. Big smile. Just very happy to accept this, looking at the Archimandrate. I will escort you, and we together will restore your people. They can hope for it. And the Archimandrate kind of shares this big smile with Emil before giving a kind of very humble nod. See, the Lady of the White Well will speak up. The nameless red archfey can provide protection directly to your people, and their court lords, myself included, will protect Vu from this final emissary. And you see Mimian finding kind of her stride and her place amongst this conversation. Will say, we can send mercenaries to help defend Vu as well. You see Suella, again, the elven royal, the deep red skin, gold blush, antlers of a wood elf, will the Dwarven province be protected? You see Gorand, the Arcanite, will speak up once more, or perhaps for the first time in this meeting. Again, well manicured beard, short hair, uh, pale. Um, the Arcanites are ensuring the safety of Rodian. If we are successful, or the other members of the faithful are successful, the only fronts they will have to worry about are the very edge of the Halfling province and the very edge of the Elven province. But we will ensure the safety of this province. And you see there's kind of a gracious nod from Mimian and acceptance from Sewellar. You see that Zarat, the tiefling with the kind of the white tattoos, almost like a bit more wild looking than the rest, will say, there are many pockets of tieflings across this land. I believe we can attempt to reach out to the groups in the Elven province and in the shadows undermine the work of the trusted, perhaps alleviate some of the weight against Vu. You see, again, the ground will begin to shake as Rodavir speaks once more. Your people are scattered, an absent representation. And it's a very strange phrasing. Not quite accusatory, but like a strange note to make. You see, Zvidit from Volina will respond. We have no place in this land truly. We are attempting to earn it with our actions. We ask for little but to be accepted. And you see Elevar with her kind of like that kind of little spark of like cunning she has, looking over like up at Rodavir and looking at the tieflings. My people once gifted lands to Rodavir and his people when they fled their homeland. Your people, similarly being refugees, should receive equal welcome. I would pledge, perhaps, at the conclusion of these events, a space to be created for the tieflings, a city for your peoples, and in time, a monarch or royal, Jesse's phrasing. You see that Feline, seeing another proposal, will say, is the proposal of a city to be constructed in the future for the tieflings, to give them voice and representation amongst the royals and the monarch, acceptable to all those present, and all will agree. You see the tieflings present who have been very isolated from Folia are suddenly like very like, huh? You gonna do what? Just shock on their faces. You see Feline will say, so proposals so far. The nameless Red Archfey and Rodavir will take Folia under their domains and protection. We will exchange aid with the Mercerian Gith towards the events in Svedenham. Humans and orcs will not endure any further sacrifices in these events, and thus the emissaries in their territories dealt with first. The humans and halfling provinces will have direct, large-scale campaigns against this corruption, while Rodavir heads north to deal with the emissary at the edge of the Orcish province. Before events eventually coalesce in Menevia, all the while the emissaries will be worked against, found, and hopefully eliminated. You see there's kind of agreement. And as this whole meeting has gone forth, Faline has been creating clauses in stacks of paper and including different elements. Um, and you see that she's been very dutiful in her position. Um, um, Before I say this next part, I should mention with the amount of powerful beings here, of the like 10 to 20, probably closer to like 10 level 20 characters in the land, um, 5 of them are here in the Archmatron, the High Subissuary, the Woetic Absolute, the Archimandrate, and Lord Dawnmire, which is no insignificant thing. This place has been appropriately warded and protected from any kinds of magics. There was awareness of what kind of enemy we face. Feline's disposition will kind of shift. Um, the Oracle of Cracked Eyes wishes to be recognized in this meeting, as she's received probably a couple of sendings from the Oracle of Cracked Eyes. You see that there is whispers and kind of rabble, concerned looks. But the Archimandrate, who has seen what faith looks like in the face of this figure, comes to a greater sense of peace as he looks around all of these influential figures and will say, let him. He has no power here. Um, and you see will be kind of silence. Um, but a general feeling of agreement. And the nameless red archfey will release some of their power, and an illusion will begin to apparate of the Oracle of Cracked Eyes. Very proud looking figure, deep green skin, black sclera, with shards of yellow crystal embedded in the eyes, not sticking out, but there's something that looks like odd, uncanny about them. Yellow crystalline horns, big villainous smile. As he's allowed to see, looking around at all of these leaders. Congratulations, Faithful. You've done well. You've kept even my eyes from seeing. I can only imagine what has been said. Or do I already know? I have issues with some of you interfering in my plans, but the secrets are out. Cards on the table. All that remains is what lies up my sleeve. And you see he's like looking at almost every person here, making eye contact. It's just an illusion, it's just a projection. For those watching, no real threat here. There's a big, powerful archfey, 5 level 20 characters, and a fucking dragon demigod. This guy, as powerful as he is would get absolutely fucking whomped here. Your land is being flooded with creatures from Steranale and Mesethale. We'll point at the tieflings, creatures who will harm you and your people. In this land, it's my vow for it to know suffering, as Sebednam has. Um, you see, takes a dramatic pause, and it looks like he's about to continue talking. As Alavar, that sharp wit of hers, with no reverence or respect, is there a point you are getting to? Your threats are as thin as desert winds, and all of our times, I'm afraid, are being wasted. He sours to that a lot and looks at her very like threateningly. Walking forward, there's no sound of his footstep. What if I told you all those who died fighting for something are doomed to torturous fates? As a demigod in this land, as he kind of gestures to himself, so many lives fall under my claim. Um, you see Lord Donmire, who's very disinterested in this figure, despite what has happened. Um, so you have revealed to us the intention of your plan, spiritual destruction. Thank you. This will be accounted for. And you see big roll of the eyes as he turns towards Donmire. How does it feel knowing that your family ends with you? I killed them all, personally. Looking around at the other people here, I have done a lot of personal work in this mission of mine. Um, and you see Lord Donmire will look at him very plainly and will say, you could not comprehend the ages of my grief. My position remains firmly unchanged. Um, you see Rodavir will begin to speak, and the illusion like falters, like the projection, like just, like a digital kind of artifact just kind of scatters a bit for a moment. I offer you forgiveness for your transgressions. And a long pause as he turns around and is like looks toward Rodavir. But your actions from this point forward will be met with the justice of my breath. Um, Long pause. And you see as the Oracle of Cracked Ice goes to say something, Rodavir will say, as a minor demigod, your power remains inconsequential to me. And again, Rodavir has scars on his body from battles incomprehensibly large. This oracle is aunt to him. You see Elevark will say, then is it acceptable for the monarch to forgive the Oracle of Cracked Eyes for these transgressions? And the Oracle will turn and just disappear, just end the projection, just gone. Um, but there's almost a sense of like a moment where the monarch or Feline is about to consider like, do we do that? We write that into our book? Um, but there is no conclusive answer given. Um, there is a feeling present. Many lives will be lost in these events. Many elven lives from this point forward. What has been agreed to here, the weight of it is felt in each and every soul. It is a relief for those from the Cloud Tower and from the human province that the issues there are of top priority, similar to the halflings. Dwarves have not had much to worry about. But the elven province, being last to be given aid with the resources available, will be changed forever. As a red and golden book is constructed with all of the pages of agreements for this meeting of the monarch, all parties present will come and sign. And with that, on this mountainside, looking over the vast green of the Quarian wetlands, rapidly extending out from this position, red. The leaves turn red, vibrant red. You watch the transition extend out into this land. All of you at this point now have to decide where you will send your aid or where you will join these campaigns. I will make a list of the missions and the order and the priority. I imagine many groups will be heading to the same place. Ideally, I mean, this will also be covered in the sessions, but at least 3, I can imagine relevant groups going to or ending up at some point at in the human province. The emissary in the City of Light needs to be dealt with and is vulnerable right now. So I imagine the City of Light, the Scarlet Sleuths, and perhaps another party can deal with that emissary. The Dark Wagers possess a powerful artifact that is good for one use against an emissary. I think it is wisest to use this against Zehenia at the Cloud Tower and make a challenging problem very simple. The rest is in your hands to be discussed. With that, I guess I'll end this solo session. And I'll see everyone on whenever the fuck I see you. Bye.